Hey, what's going on? It's RamX3. I built 30 commander decks in 2024, give or take a few. And I feel like I learned a lot, and I just really want to share um, how I've evolved as a deck builder and a game player for Magic the Gathering this year. I built all my decks in person with my collection sitting on my floor or at my desk, um, with a ton of cards around me. And it's a way that allows me to get really personal with the deck building and the cards, and in the end, I enjoy it um, a ton, and a lot more than just going online and putting a deck together and then buying or proxying the cards. I really only end up buying 1 to 3 cards per deck, usually around $10 to $15. And that's because I don't play super crazy, power level 9, 10, CDH, whatever. I build with what I have, and then I use a little cash to fill in the gaps, and it's really enjoyable, and I've learned a lot. Um, so I just want to share some things that I've learned this year. These are all learning and thinking and talking points. I hope that you and me can come back to this and reflect on these points and see how we've grown in 2025 and onwards. So sit back, relax, grab some food, grab some water, grab some snacks, and listen to a random dude on the internet babble about cardboard. Hope you enjoy it. So here we go. Point one. You gotta know what your deck does, and I know that sounds really simple, or like, yeah, no shot, dude. But yeah, you really need to understand what your deck is trying to do. This is something that I've really learned in the last couple months. Um, that's really brought my game to the next level. And it needs to do more than one thing as well. So, for example, my Morska deck, it's an artifact deck actually. It's banned artifacts, and the goal of the deck is to get Microsynth Lattice and Darksteel Forge out on the battlefield at the same time, which makes, Darksteel Forge makes all my artifacts indestructible. Microsynth Lattice makes everything an artifact, so my board becomes indestructible, and then I can hold up my counter spells for exile removal, and kind of just eke out a win through being this massive wall. Um, the deck wants to do that, and that's really hard to do, especially when you don't run really any tutors in the deck. So the deck needs to have a backup strategy. Every deck needs to. And so the backup strategy for the Morska deck is a what I call a 2 synergy. So anytime that something happens twice, I get a little something, I get a little value. So whenever, an opponent draws 2 cards, I'm going to draw a card. Whenever I draw 2 cards, I'm going to make a token, or I'm going to put counters on stuff. It allows me to use those clues and just kind of produce value throughout the game until I can kind of get my win con and really get that artifact train going. The other example I wanted to show you is my Captain Gaathrod deck, and this is going to be hard to explain because the deck out of the box wants to be a horror typal mill deck. It wants to do the horror typal and the mill at the same time through the cards. And I took that deck and I separated them actually into 2 different things. So the first thing the deck is going to do is just straight up mill. It's a Demir mill deck. And it backs itself up. It backs that mill strategy up with a horror typal deck or sub themes or undertones. So the way that it runs now is different than out of the box, although not a ton of cards have changed. But the idea and the thought process, and the theory of the deck is a mill deck before it's a horror typal deck, and that allows me to really powerhouse mill strategies while kind of taking the back seat and using the horror typal stuff. It's just a way to protect my life total and my board state, until I eventually mill everyone out and win. You need to build your deck backwards. A lot of people that I know and myself start by finding their commander, as all people do, and then they're gonna start with the 30 cards that they want to play and maybe their win con. And that works, but I find that a lot of the time once you start looking for a win con and 30 cards, that becomes 50 cards and then 60 cards, and then oh crap, I only have 20 slots for lands, and then it's harder to make those cuts um, down the road. And a lot of the time, you haven't included ramp, you haven't included your draw, and you haven't included your removal. So you need to start backwards. You need to start with your win con, and then you need to go to your ramp and your draw. Now, these, I'm not going to talk about the numbers of each. There's a billion videos and a billion articles you can go watch. But you need to find out what your ramp is and what your draw is. Because without those, you won't have cards. And without cards, you'll have nothing to use your ramp on. And if you don't have ramp, you won't have any mana to play all the cards you've been drawing with. So those need to be weighed equally. Removal, and when I say removal, that includes protection, right? Interaction is probably the better word to use there. You need to then find your interaction to protect your board and hurt other players' boards. Once you've gone ahead and you found those three groups of cards, you need to then go ahead and find the cards you're actually going to play with, the 30, 35 or so cards that are going to progress your board state, that are going to move the game forwards, that are going to help you actually end up winning. Once you've got those, you should have about 30, 40 slots left for lands, and then you can make the cuts here and there until you find that perfect balance. I've got a note here. You need to make sure that your lands include utility lands, right? Just these days, tri lands, dual lands, and basics aren't going to cut it. Your lands are so powerful and they are so great. And you need to be able to use them to help your game plan. I recently, in my Omnath Logosil Royal deck, it's a landfall lands matter deck. I recently found Mystic Sanctuary and put it in the deck, replacing a basic island, because I was having a really hard time recurring my instants and my sorceries from my graveyard, which are a huge part of how that deck moves forwards. I run a lot of cards that bounce lands back to my hand to get value so that I can play the lands again and get more value. But those cards are one and done. With Mystic Sanctuary and how fast the card can draw through the deck, I'm almost guaranteed to hit Mystic Sanctuary every time, which in turn guarantees me to recur these instant and sorceries, which just help me win. So remember to build your deck backwards. It's going to help you when you go forwards playing with the deck. A big thing for me, and I know a lot of my friends, is falling into preconceived notions of what certain cards are. And what I mean by that is a draw spell is always going to be a blue 1 to 3 mana card. A ramp spell is always going to be a green, sorcery like Cultivate or Rock. And that's not always the case. You need to be able to play cards that fit into what your commander wants. So Rex Sage is a great example of artifact or enchant removal in elf decks, because Rex Sage is an elf that destroys and target artifact or enchantments. You're leaning into the elf synergy while also removing something on your opponent's board. I built a Azorius Blink deck this year. You can see there's Witch Enchanter, Claim Jumper, and Knight of the White Orchid, which are all cards in that deck. And I chose these cards over traditional removal, maybe, such as Disenchant or Rocks, because these cards in a Blink deck are recurred, sometimes multiple times per turn. They're Blink, they leave the battlefield and they come back. And they're able to get so much darn value. These cards are better, the Claim Jumper and the Knight are better than Artifact Ramp most of the time. The Witch Enchanter almost always is better than a Disenchant in that deck. Do I run its Disenchant in the deck? No. Could I? Sure. But I believe that would slow the deck down. So you need to be able to remove yourself from what you believe, this kind of card is this, that kind of card is that, and look at the full card pool to see what's going to benefit you and your deck the best. The next thing is you need to use tags and you need to check your curve. As someone who builds all their decks, in person, with the cards in front of them, either on my floor or on my desk, it's hard for me to sort of organize the cards. Sometimes cards will do multiple things in your deck, and if I only have one copy of the card, I can't put it into two categories at once. By uploading your deck to websites such as Moxfield or Architect, not sponsors of this channel, I personally use Moxfield. I don't like Architect. You can then organize your cards and see what they're really doing, right? This way you can see how many draw spells you have, how many ramp spells you have, and from there you can go ahead and you can make the changes as necessary. Additionally, these websites are going to go ahead and give you your mana curve, so you can see if you're playing too many high-end, high mana value cards, or maybe too many low mana value ones, or maybe you have 0 4 drops and that spot in your deck is kind of empty. By uploading your deck to a website, you get a lot of valuable information that is impossible or really hard to come by looking at your deck in person. Another thing that I do that helps greatly is using staples as a baseline, but being confident enough and knowledgeable enough to not commit to them. So, for example, in a black deck, I might put Flashback Marauder in the deck if I know I need some kind of creature based removal spell. Down the line, there's a good chance that Flashback Marauder is going to become a Cursed Marauder, because in pretty much every way, the Cursed Marauder is just a better card. It's a cheaper card that does the same thing, and I sure as hell ain't playing Flashback Marauder for its stats. For example, I might put Murder in as another removal spell, but down the road, I'll put in Go for the Throat or some other card that can remove um, creatures from the board. Cultivate and Dark Ritual are just gonna be, cards that take the place of ramp spells. Dark Ritual and Cultivate are both great spells. Later in this video, I will show mathematically why I think Cultivate is one of the best ramp spells in all of Magic. Um, and these cards probably wouldn't get the cut. But if you have worse ramp cards in your collection laying around, you can throw them in kind of again as a staple, knowing that down the road it's going to become something else. But what you've done is you've solidified that card in the 99. You've given it a purpose. You've given it a reason to be there, a reason to stay. And from there, you can optimize as time and finances allow. The next thing you need to know is what is your commander? The YouTubers, I'm gonna butcher this, apologies. Celorbrius Snail has a video on what he calls a counterbalance commander, which is a commander that offsets your deck as a whole, and it's really interesting. And I encourage you to go check out his video. Um, but you need to understand what your commander does. Is your commander mandatory? Do you need it on the battlefield to win, to do the thing? Is it a backup? Is it something you can pull out, when maybe you're losing the game or you're having a hard time getting ahead? That's going to help you eke out the victory. Or maybe your commander is just another card in your hand that just helps out. It's not going to decide whether or not you win, but it's just going to help you. It's a little less intense than a backup. And if you were to never play your just another card commander, the game probably wouldn't have gone any differently. So, for example, a mandatory commander that I personally run is Gov. It's a Gov. It's Abzan combo. Essentially, it's a combo deck. And I have to have Gov on the board to do any of my combos. If I am not running Gov, I am not ripping my combos to the moon, and I'm not going to win. So Gov is a mandatory commander. I would also assume Atraxa is a mandatory commander, right? If you're proliferating, you're going to want to do that as often as consistently as possible, and Atraxa is pretty darn good at proliferating consistently. On the complete other end of that spectrum, I have an Omnath Locus of All deck, and it is a Legends Matter Cascade deck. And all Omnath does is allow me to retain mana to ramp, and it allows me to see an extra card each turn. That's it. It has nothing to do with my deck. There are better commanders that do the legendary cascade thing, but I really like running Omnath, and I think Omnath does it well and brings a fun twist to the deck. So Omnath is just another card. It's just another card in my 99. It could go in the 99. I could play with 100 cards and no commander, and the deck would run just the same, and honestly, probably worse. And so that's what I mean by what is your commander? What does it do? What is its purpose? And how are you utilizing it to further the deck's potential and further the deck's win? Uh, this is gonna get a little nerdy. I'm sure people have posted this before, but through my deck building, I've realized there's a mathematical way to know whether or not you are getting value for your ramp spells. So if you are spending 1 mana to ramp, that spell should put a land card into your hand. If you're spending 2 mana, it should put the land on the battlefield. Most of the time, 99% of the time, that land will come in tapped. And if you're spending 3 mana, you should get both what a 1 mana and a 2 mana spell will do, which is 1 mana to the field, 1 mana to the hand, again, most likely tapped. So the examples of this is Analyze the Pollen, which is actually also a trend breaker, which we'll get into later. But I like running Analyze the Pollen. I love an opening hand with Analyze the Pollen. I get to turn one, just get a land. That is great. I love that turn one play. Analyze the Pollen is a great example of a 1-mana ramp spell. Nature's Lore, on the other hand, is 2 mana. You get to go find a forest card, and you get to put that on the battlefield. Note, untapped. Most 2-mana spells are just going to go get you a basic land tapped, but Nature's Lore is actually ahead of the curve, and it just gets you 1 card, but it has to be a forest, but it comes in untapped. Another card that fits that 2-mana kind of value really well is Rampant Growth. 2 mana, 1 and a green. Go find any basic land, put on the battlefield tapped. And of course, the 3 mana is Cultivate, probably the best ramp spell in my opinion. In Magic the Gathering, in Commander, pay 3 mana, get a land to the battlefield tapped, and you get a land for next turn. On to Trend Breakers. Trend Breakers are cards that, for a small cost, eke out more value than this 1/2/3 mana sort of thing above. So Intus Restoration for 3 mana, you have to sacrifice a land, and then you're going to get 2 basics and put them on the battlefield tapped. That's bad value. But if you have a creature with power 4 or greater, you then get 3 basic land cards and put them on the battlefield tapped. Paired with this card's instant speed, this is a fantastic ramp spell that goes great in any big deck or any deck that can recur lands, like a Modrotha deck. I love Intus Restoration, and I think it's a fantastic card. Another trend breaker that I really enjoy is Bloom Tender. Bloom Tender gets better the more colors that you play. I play this in my 5-color Omnath deck. So if you have Domain, you could spend 2 mana and then get back 5. The card is extremely powerful and is able to ramp you super fast, super early in the game. So Bloom Tender and Intus Restoration, both trend breakers. Technically, Nature's Lore and Analyze the Pollen are also both trend breakers, but not as blatantly obvious as Intus Restoration or Bloom Tender. So next time you're looking at a card that's going to ramp you, use this information to assess whether or not you're getting good value for that mana. So the next thing I want to look at is mathematical ramp stuff for what would be fair artifact ramp. So 2 mana is going to give you an artifact that is going to ramp you 1 mana because it's filtering your mana. So the Signets, for example, you'll pay 2, and then you can filter through it, but you're only ramping 1. 3 mana is going to give you a rock that just taps for mana. You pay 3 mana, and then you would get 1 back. So the Clue Stones, the Lockets, and the Key Runes are all examples of that. With this knowledge, we can also say that land is valued at about 3 CMC. The trend breakers for artifact ramp are going to be the talisman or the talismans. I don't know how you say it. I don't know how it's spelt in the plural. But the talisman, you're going to pay 2, and you can take 1 damage to get a color. That is the trend breaker there. But what really makes the talisman great is you can also just tap them for colorless. So it's really no loss. So that being said, you should always be running the talisman over any other artifact ramp. Some final parting thoughts. If a card in your deck matters, creatures, spells, cards that do A, B, or C, you're going to want at minimum 15, but you really want to shoot for 25 to 32 of them. You're going to want to see those cards all the time. That's why we generally run about 35 to 37 pieces of land, because you kind of always want to be seeing them. Above all, prioritize your strategy. Use the information we just covered to prioritize your strategy. Remember, cards are not always what they seem. There's probably a better card out there for you to run. And I'm sure that, and confident that taking the time to really see what cards are out there and comparing it to what's already in your deck, you can go ahead and make that deck much more powerful. There's no more slides. That's it. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed this. Please engage the algorithm. I hate that I have to say that. Shout out to the Trinket Mage and Snail because they inspired me to do this. And I hope you learned something. If you did, please comment down below. Let me know what you learned. Please let me know what your takeaways are. If I got something wrong, or you think something could be improved, or you've gone to that next level of thinking about anything that I've brought up, please, please, please let me know. I love getting to that next level of thinking. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I'd love the comment section to become a shared pool of wisdom and knowledge. Thank you again. so much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this little snippet of knowledge from another stranger on the internet. Thank you. Have a great one.